Hello and welcome to The Liberator, the Minoan special here in Crete. Let's get it. The Minoans of ancient Crete were master artists and craftsmen whose work continues to stun and amaze to this day. Vibrant frescoes of youths leaping over thundering bulls, flowing dresses, mischievous monkeys, snake-shaking goddesses. The Minoans were as grand as they are intriguing. But perhaps the most remarkable and mysterious Minoan treasure is a tiny stone with an engraving of two men fighting a duel. This discovery changed art history forever. At only 3.6 centimeters long, the detail on this object is not just impressive, it's downright perplexing. How did they make this? What does the scene depict? What master craftsman could be behind it? Whack on your scuba gear as we go for a plunge into the glittering Bronze Age Aegean, and don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, or I will find you. I was the first to kill my man when the armies clashed the spearman Mulius, and took his horses. I struck him as he came at me with my bronze-tipped spear, and down in the dust he went. Then I mounted his chariot, joining the charioteers in the front rank, only to find the noble Epians scattering in flight at the fall of their great warrior, their captain of horse. I fell on them like a fierce storm, and a pair of warriors bit the dust beside every one of the 50 chariots I took, conquered by my spear. I would have killed the Moliones, the sons of Actor, too, if their real father, Poseidon, the mighty Earthshaker, had not veiled them in mist and saved them. Zeus gave strength to the men of Pylos as we swept the wide plain, slaughtering men and stripping their rich armour, till we reached Buprasium, wheat country, the Elenian rock and Elysium hill, where Athena stayed the army. There I killed my last man, and left him, and back from Buprasium to Pylos we drove the swift horses, the Achaeans honouring Zeus among gods, and Nestor among men. The Palace of Nestor near modern Pylos is the best preserved Bronze Age site in all of Greece. Named after the Homeric hero Nestor, who we just heard a dramatic reading from, it is a veritable treasure trove of Linear B tablets, the debris of a great hall, and the scatterings of many vivid mosaics. Archaeologists unearthed the site initially in 1939, but in 2015 the University of Cincinnati renewed digs at the site. A team of archaeologists including Flint Dibble of Debating Graham Hancock fame began excavating an olive grove near the Palace of Nestor. What they found next was stunning. The so-called tomb of the Griffin Warrior contained unbelievable treasures, weapons and jewellery. The tomb dates from around 1500 BC, around 200 years earlier than the main palace at Pylos. But who was its occupant? Why did he have all these riches? Well, we know that the so-called Griffin Warrior was a man who died between the ages of 30 and 35, although the cause of death is still unknown. He was around 5 foot tall, and they found him interred with all of the accoutrements of a Bronze Age Mycenaean warrior. A boar's tusk helmet, a bronze cuirass, a bronze sword, and many golden rings and hair combs. The contents of his tomb reveal an individual deeply engaged with the rich and mature civilization of the Minoans, based on Crete. Perhaps he was an ancestor of the later great Wanaxes, or kings of Pylos, who was using the rich foreign culture of the Minoans to try and pioneer new cultures and forms of organisation on the Greek mainland. It's easy to see why Minoan civilization would act as a cultural lightning rod and a source of inspiration for ambitious mainlanders during this period. While a non-Greek civilization, the Minoans' art and architecture, with its fabulous colour palettes, its eye for detail, its serene depictions of nature, has provided much allure to modern audiences and would surely have besotted the more parochial mainland Greeks of the day. This process of cultural borrowing, of more complex societies acting as catalysts for developing cultures nearby, is also a theme I explore in a recent video I made on the explorations that ancient Egyptians carried out, and I'll put a link in the description so you can check that excellent video out. So, what is the Pylos Combat Agate? Well, in short, it's a seal stone. Seal stones were used on Crete as signatures and as stamps. It would be an engraved stone or piece of gold that you would press into a bit of clay to seal a document or mark your ownership of a given object. However, these engraved objects were also used as personal adornments, and probably conferred great status to their wearer, as well as a sense of identity, given the great artistry of so many of these objects. In the period of the Griffin Warrior, 1500 BC that is, on mainland Greece, there seems to be no evidence of seal stones actually being used in an administrative sense, and therefore it was just bling for mainland Greeks. And you can imagine the extra status that these prestigious Minoan objects would confer to a mainlander at this time. 3 figures are etched on the Pylos Combat Agate. One is a tall youth with long, flowing hair. He is beardless, he has no armour, wearing a codpiece and back flap, and armed with a double-edged sword with a horned hilt. He lunges over the body of a deceased foe, arcing his sword over the shield of another opponent, whose head he has twisted away by grasping the crest of his helm. His sword plunges downward into his foe's jugular. His opponents, dead and alive, wear kilts. His immediate victim is wearing a helmet with a large proboscis-like crest, and is equipped with a large figure-of-8 shield and a spear. There is a fallen sword on the ground. I have to emphasize here that the detail on this object is absolutely extraordinary. Now, let me quote from the paper in which the Pylos Combat Agate was published. The minute scale of the engraving is unparalleled, and all the more extraordinary given the hardness of agate. The length of the scabbard lying next to the vanquished warrior measures 1.01 centimeters. The head of the victor, 0.29 centimeters. The height of a figure-of-8 shield, 1.33 centimeters, and the diameter of a seal stone worn on the wrist of the victor, only 0.045 centimeters. So how did they make this? The question instantly arises of, did they need some sort of magnifying glass to actually create such a thing? As some of the details on this are so fine that they're very hard, if not impossible, to spot with the naked eye, and were only detected through microphotography. The idea of a magnifying glass is not really substantiated in the ancient world, at least in this period, but it is plausible. There is one example I'm aware of, an object called the Nimrod lens, which was a rock crystal found in the Assyrian city of Nimrod. Now, scholars debate whether this rock crystal was actually used for magnification at all, but it provides some basis to believe that perhaps they did have magnifying equipment, but there is no direct evidence of the Minoans possessing such a thing. Another option is the use of nearsighted artists. Nearsighted people can see a lot of details up close at the expense of more long-distance vision, and so perhaps there was someone like this who could have the fine-tuned vision necessary to create such tiny details. Also, agate itself is a very hard rock, making this all the more impressive. The artist would have perhaps had to use a copper or bronze tool, maybe mixed with a powder of a harder rock, perhaps even diamond, and only then would that abrasive surface be able to make grooves and chisels into the hard surface of the agate. I mean, it's incredible to think about how much hard work and dedication someone had to pour into making this exquisite object. Also, the question of where this stone hailed from is maybe not immediately obvious. I've already said it's Minoan, but why is it we believe that? Well, for one, it's the stylistic attention to detail and the quality of this object. Minoan artists, at least at this period, and probably in general, were just creating more refined, more beautiful, more complex pieces of art than their Mycenaean mainland Greek counterparts. Crucially, there's no evidence of any sealstone workshops on mainland Greece at this time, when there is evidence of such workshops on Crete. This kind of raises an interesting question of how interrelated were the Minoans and Mycenaeans, and what was the nature of their relationship? Was it a hostile one or a reciprocal one? It's difficult to untangle this, but what's very clear is that Pylos was plugged into the Minoan world fully, and I have a great example to share with you. So the brickwork at Pylos closely follows Minoan models in the period up to 1200 BC, using cut limestone blocks, for example. And what's most intriguing is that the archaeology of Pylos evolves in lockstep with developments on Crete at the time. So it's clear that what's going on can't be summed up by the old trope of the warlike, bloodthirsty, patriarchal Mycenaeans come and, invade the peaceful, matriarchal society of Minoan Crete, destroy them, take over their lands. This relationship was reciprocal. The Mycenaeans and Minoans shared a common culture to some extent. However, how much culture and how much of a world they shared is really up for debate. Perhaps the analogy of Greece and Rome, where a civilization was eclipsed by an upstart who nevertheless continued to revere their predecessors, is relevant here. So let's analyse what is actually depicted on this stone. Intriguingly, the Pylos Combat Agate bears extremely close parallels with a gold seal found at Mycenae, a Bronze Age site on the Greek mainland, the fabled home of Homer's Agamemnon, and a major Bronze Age site which of course gives us the name of the Mycenaean mainland Greek civilization. Its excavator Schliemann describes it in the following terms. The intaglio on the following smaller ornament represents two warriors fighting a deadly duel. The one to the left of the spectator is a tall, powerful, beardless young man with an uncovered head, whose loins only are covered, the rest of the body being naked. He leans with all the weight of his body on his advanced left leg, and with his uplifted right hand he has just plunged his double-edged sword into the throat of his antagonist, who falls mortally wounded. This latter is represented with a long beard. His head is covered with a helmet, over which we see a half-circle, which appears to be fastened into the forepart of the helmet, and to represent the long curved horn, which we see protruding from the forepart of the helmets of the 5 warriors on the warrior vase. I ask whether we do not see here, in the young, powerful, handsome man, Achilles, the most beautiful man in the Greek army, and in his antagonist, Hector of the dancing helmet crest. So possibly this was a stock scene from a myth like those from the Iliad, or just a figure of warrior might in general. The heroic figure's lack of armor certainly suggests strength and power and bravery. The famous American classicist Emily Vermeule also commented about this period of history that, I need not stress the great period of Troy 6, starting 1700 BC, down to the early 14th century, is also the great period of Greek interest in battle art and siege scenes. Again, another evocation of the Iliad. Many scholars indeed believe the Iliad to have Mycenaean roots. Is it so fanciful to posit that the roots of the Iliad, told in stories around the hearths of Megarons, on ships bound for Asia, or round the campfires of shepherds armed against Thessalian lions, inspired not just poetry, but scenes in art like this? Were the figures on the Pylos Combat Agate figures of myth, or history, or somewhere in between? Was the attacking champion a role model for the long-haired Griffin Warrior with his 6 combs? Another interesting detail is that there seems to be a difference in dress between the attacker and defender. The attacker wears a codpiece and backflap, while the deceased and the man he's about to kill are wearing kilts. So what is this? Is this a Minoan versus a Mycenaean? Well, that seems unlikely. We've already dismissed the old trope of peace-loving Minoans versus brutal Mycenaeans. And also, because this is a Mycenaean man with a Minoan pendant, it seems unlikely that he would want to show such a conflict, unless, of course, he looted it off the body of a dead Minoan, which I suppose isn't impossible. It seems more likely that he would have commissioned such a thing, although plundering is really not out of the question. Again, we can ponder, is this an Aegean versus a Trojan? Is this an echo of Homer's Iliad? It's possible, but again, we can't really say so because we don't even know if the Trojan War was real, it's hotly debated by scholars. I must say Schliemann's evoking of the Trojan War, of Achilles and Hector, is very romantic and very appealing, but I don't think we can say it is such with any certainty, although, never say never. Maybe it was just a representation of an ambiguous clash of groups which could appeal to any potential owner. So, to conclude, this is an utter masterpiece. It's a once-in-a-generation find. It would be a masterpiece at any scale. The Pylos Combat Agate has redefined art history. Its tiny scale has perplexed scholars, and frankly, it's left me gobsmacked at the ingenuity and talent of Minoan craftsmen. That Aegean artist had such a thorough understanding of the human body and all its subtleties 1,000 years before the classical Greek period, to the extent that they could show tensing muscles and lively rippling of tendons on a miniature scale. It's frankly astounding. The mystery that surrounds the Minoans with their unknown writing and language, and even the Mycenaeans, whose language we have, but whose culture remains obscure in many ways, just adds to the mists of enigma and mystery surrounding this object. It's another jolting reminder that people of the past were inspired, diligent, creative, beyond even people today. If you're ever tempted to think of the Bronze Age as a series of caricatures, pathetic serfs, terrifying priest-kings, blood-stained ziggurats, I urge you to remember the Pylos Combat Agate, and think if you, or your culture, would ever create something so impressive and so exquisite. Thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me in the next video. Please like, subscribe, and ciao.